how much of the work is still fundamentally operational and how much of it is actually core R&D?
India is the place I can have the broadest representation of what I can do for my global business. While you love the little shiny object around what the GenAI thing does, which is great, you realize that the data plumbing at an enterprise level is a massive impediment. The big thing that's been preventing many companies, especially the large incumbent companies that have always had an ambition to move with a lot more agility, but an inability to do that, is because
while the narrative often suggests GCCs are moving beyond back-end operations into innovation and product development, the reality on the ground is more nuanced. In this episode of Brew Talks, I'm joined by Sanjay Menon, Managing Director and EVP at Publicis Sapient India, one of the leading digital business transformation consultancies. We discuss how GCCs are evolving, what global companies are really expecting from their India teams today, and the practical challenges organizations face when trying to scale AI beyond pilot projects. So let's get into it. So Sanjay, our conversation, let's just dive right into the GCC bit in India. That's such a booming market right now. So my first question itself is kind of like just cutting straight to it. So we're hearing a lot of conversations on how now GCC in India are evolving beyond just back-end roles. They're moving into R&Ds and kind of like core functions. But you being on the ground and having seen a lot in practice, how much of the work is still fundamentally operational and how much of it is actually core R&D and those kind of functions?
Yeah. See, I think if you look at the space, right, I think with any kind of services space as well, it's a continuum, right? So if you look at GCCs as they evolved, as they were called, captives initially, right, about 30 years back, was a lot about templatized processes that could be done with just pure labor arbitrage, right? You lift and shift a process and have someone operate that process who's from an economic standpoint, much cheaper, and gives you clear OpEx savings. That's how it started. And I think that arbitrage is still there. So there are those who came in, they've done that. I think for us, the excitement has been that how that space has evolved. So, the bookend has kept moving out in terms of the value realization you can have from India for the GCCs. So that, I think, started off with OpEx started to become CapEx. You could start to do product development. Now, I think there's, you can innovate from India. I think, and that's, I think on two, three different reasons. One is, I think the big reason has been that you move from just execution capability to shaping capability and conceptualizing capability. I think in some part, thanks to third largest startup ecosystem, which has attracted back or created talent here, which is a lot more entrepreneurial. So now you have a lot of tech entrepreneurial talent. So, that's been helping drive a lot of the engineering R&D thing that you're talking about, and people being able to, take up product development, innovation kind of initiatives and drive that from India. I think the other part that also driving that from India is more, and this is what when we work with clients and we help them set up their GCCs, what we advise them on is that you should not be a single threaded, ambition, which is just not about lots of engineering. That anyway is there. But when you marry that with product management, with user experience, with visual design, with tech strategy, that's when you unlock inordinate amount of value. And I think that's where some of the GCCs are now kind of, and the ones we partner with and others as well, they're starting to make that journey. But the short answer to your question is, so the whole continuum is operating. I think what's happening is, unlike the whole world uses the term shift left, in this I would say it's shift right. And if you assume right is more value realization, I think you're stretching that continuum. And there's a certain percentage. Is it a very large percentage that has shifted as much right? No, it's a small percentage. And I think a few things also come in the way of doing that, right? And this is when so if you ask me what's the anatomy of a GCC that's going to be successful in the future, and that's what we advise our clients about, is you have to look at something which is culturally a seamless extension of the rest of the world for that company. So it's not an outpost. It's a seamless extension from a culture standpoint. It has to be AI first in its thinking and tooling. It has to be value oriented and not cost oriented. What I mean by that is you're trying to create something which is saying, what is the business impact I'm creating, and not just am I making it cheaper to do something, right? So are you value oriented and are you multi-capability? So I think if you have these kind of attributes, you're typically set up for success. Does it guarantee success? Absolutely not, because there's a lot more that goes into it. But I think this is what we see as the DNA or the anatomy of GCCs that will be successful. But things that come in the way of making this happen, as we advise clients and you navigate. See, finally, it's a change management journey as well, as much for the mothership to have such a future-facing extension be created, right? So the way I always call this out is there is a difference between permission and ambition. What is the
Okay.
ambition? The ambition of the GCC, and what is the permission from the mothership?
Mm-hmm.
Both. When you don't have permission and you have ambition, you actually have a high level of friction, and there is an underperformance because you are frustrated. When you have the permission and you don't have the ambition, the frustration shifts to the mothership, which is, hey, I actually was looking for something a lot more strategic, and what I'm getting is a lot more operational. So you really have to get both of these in place, and that comes down to what kind of leadership do you start with, which can set the kind of influence the ambition itself, right? And kind of work with that. So I think to me, therefore, it's a very exciting space in terms of the possibilities, and there's so much of activity already going on. But I think the next 2-3 years will really, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, that how much of this are you actually able to traverse. But the opportunity is definitely there. I think India has the talent. I think the opportunity is very, very clear and very present. Now the question is about making the journey, right? And that's why we are excited in the space and partner with our clients as they look to make this journey.
Got it, Sanjay. So, which brings me to the next question, which is a continuation of what you mentioned. A very interesting thing: permission and ambition. So, when you're working with these global clients who are looking to scale in India, do you see any particular pattern or trends that you see? Like, for example, are they expecting something specific from India versus when these GCCs are opening in other countries, they're not so picky about certain things? Any trends and stuff?
It's a great question. See, and I'm going to say this, and I'm also going to contradict myself almost immediately, right? So, I think when people think about India, they think about two things: the kind of the off the cuff recall is scale and cost. And as they start the journey and they look at actually what's possible, it actually flips out to saying, how can I be strategic? And scale should be a byproduct. We advise clients saying scale should be a byproduct. Scale should not be the reason you're doing something, because with everything that's going on in the world right now, scale may or may not be a massive differentiator, but your ability to create value will be. So if you're focused on getting the best of the capability and creating the most value, and in that process you end up becoming big, that's awesome. But if you want to be big from a start, you're almost saying, I'm going to draw an organization that's a normal curve, right? So when they think about India, think about scale and cost. When they think about other geographies, they don't necessarily think about scale. They think about specific expertise, or they think about unique attributes. Like, for example, you may pick another country because you'd say same time zone. You may pick another country because there's a language advantage. Like if I pick, for example, Latin America, or even some of the other countries you pick. In some you may pick because there's a specific capability that's more centered around there. Like there are some regions that are actually very good at multilingual work, and others may not. But scale is usually not what I have seen as something they're seeking. They're seeking a very specific problem to be solved. When they think about India, they think about India solving a very wide aperture of problems, which is India is going to be the place. So I have seen very few clients who tell me that we're thinking of, let's say, a 3-pronged strategy. We're thinking of Eastern Europe, we're thinking about India, and I'm thinking about LATAM. Let's pick that for a second, right? And I'm thinking of serious scale in all three. I've very rarely seen that. They'll be like, okay, I'm looking at LATAM because I want somewhere the same time zone to North America. I'm looking at Eastern Europe because from a language standpoint, other things, there's access to Europe. And I'm looking at India because that's where I'm going to create my scaled capability that funnels back into everything else. So I think that's usually the trend that I've seen. The trend that I see changing now is, as I said, that even in India, scale may be a byproduct, but they definitely look at saying, India is the place I can have the broadest representation of what I can do for my global business. Because if you look at in India, it comes to engineering, it comes to product management, it comes to strategy, it comes to design, it comes to data, just data engineering, data analytics, data sciences. You actually can create a multi-threaded talent pool that you can't have anywhere else. I mean, I've not seen any other geography or region that can create a level of high-end expertise across so many capability sets. And the other thing that also now is a big advantage for GCCs, especially if you pick industry like financial services. The Indian financial services industry itself is a benchmark for the rest of the world. So if I have people from the Indian banking industry joining a GCC in India of a global banking thing, that person is inherently going to be able to influence, let's say, a lot of stuff around payment tech, which is
Does
still
that happen a lot, Sanjay?
we're seeing
Such
that
kind
trend.
of.
We're seeing a trend of definitely people from marquee industry leaders in India joining the GCCs and then in a way becoming part of their product leader set. Influencing. See, because what it does, for example, if I'm a GCC for banking in India and I want to set up a payment center of excellence, if I go and pick someone from a leading Indian bank, their ability to talk about that product itself as an opportunity and what it will take to get that as a winning proposition, and then I need just the market context, which today, even from an AI standpoint, is not it's not so difficult to get. But even if for that, if you partner with the local geographies, you have now changed the nature of how you configure that team. Because if you go back 10 years, that team would have been a senior set of leaders in the local geography, and India basically having an execution engine that's creating all the POCs or the POVs around this, right? But now you've moved a lot of that senior cost as well into India. And in India, you've got a far more multi-capability pod, so you can actually innovate at scale. I mean, if you could kind of call it that. So I think those are the opportunities, and I think where we're seeing at least clients, how they think about India differently from other geographies.
Okay, got it, Sanjay. So let's just talk a bit about Publicis Sapient. In terms of, you have also brought in a lot of enterprise AI platforms like Bodhi and Slingshot. I just want to understand the real world deployments of these. I mean, you don't have to go too much into numbers or anything, but just to have a sense of where do you think these platforms uh, are giving you tangible results versus do you see any particular industries or subsectors where you see adoption being a little slower than expected?
No, I think, see, across the board, we're seeing a lot of interest, and we are seeing engagements across the board, across industries, right? Now, some industries inherently move faster than others, like financial services. They're always very early adopters of most tech, right? A more regulated industry, takes more time. But in this case, actually, we're seeing it very, very almost democratic because if you look at some areas, for example, areas like legacy modernization, right? It's a need across industries. See, the big thing that's been preventing many companies, especially the large incumbent companies that have always had an ambition to move with a lot more agility, but an inability to do that is because their tech landscape, their legacy tech landscape is, I wouldn't use the word archaic, but definitely not contemporary.
Okay.
But the cost of making it contemporary, that business case never held out. Because so now with like for example, when we work with clients and we're using our product sets, we're using the Slingshot, or we're using Bodhi in a lot of cases, we're doing agentic workflows. But for legacy modernization, we're using Slingshot. The cost and the timeline of doing that modernization is massively curtailed. Like for one of the large healthcare majors, we brought that down from 7 years to 2 years, right?
Okay.
On some very relevant budget savings. So now when you're doing that, everybody will say, look here, if you can modernize and treat my tech debt in a very cost effective manner and a time efficient manner, every industry will say yes to that. Because that has, what it does then is it creates a baseline for you to now transform from there with things that you couldn't do earlier, which now help you realize your ambition. So now if you have a more agile version of your earlier mainframe platform, it can now work with a lot more real world and new world tech in a far more seamless manner, right? So I think retiring the old tech debt, that's becoming a big this thing. When it comes to things like Bodhi, the advantage you have is now the business users, like for example in banks, if you're looking at workflows around customer engagement, right? Or if you're looking at let's say marketing content creation in a lot of the large MNCs, and that's where they're doing. And these are brands that spend millions on content creation or content management. Now, if you have agentic workflows that business users can configure, you're liberating the timeline that it takes to do this. Because otherwise, you say, okay, I want to get this done. I will go hand this off to another department or team in my company who will work with other partners. So now you can say, okay, I want to do this. Where do I adopt this platform? How do I learn to use it? And after that, you're making the act of creating value as near to the person who realizes the value of what's being created, and you're taking away a lot of layers in between, right? So I think we're seeing definitely. We're not seeing adoption challenges or deployments based on industry. It comes down to culture and ambition and readiness. See, because at the end of the day, every company is also on a journey of saying, how ready am I to embrace the change? And that's your classic change management, and that's why we also work with clients to help them understand and start to make these changes, and then get comfortable with these platforms. we call our strategy people plus products, right? Which is you have these products that give you the jump start, and you wrap around that with really, really good people. So you still need great people. So great people with great products is going to create outsized value for you than great products with average people. That will still create a lot of value, but will you really get the most inordinate value? Not as likely. So this thing is, how do you marry the best people with the best products? So that's why when we look at our product set and our talent pool that we bring in, we think that's where we can create value for our clients. Because that's the kind of perfect marriage that we are aiming for from that standpoint. But yeah, the challenge is the same with any change management. Is the way I would see it.
Got it. So, which brings me to the next question, a continuation of the change management bit. Now, I think, of course, companies are demanding for AI-driven solutions. They want AI at scale. But I'm pretty sure you're still seeing companies who have kind of underestimated what AI can do, or rather overestimated what it can do, which leads to a lot of wrong assumptions, or you're kind of expecting a lot to happen. So what is your take on that, Sanjay? How is that behavior?
There's the classic philosophy, right, which says, with most of such changes, you grossly overestimate in the first 5 years, and then you grossly underestimate maybe in the next 10, right? And I think with AI as well, like, if you go back to the web, when the internet happened, first 5 years, people said, oh, all you're doing is publishing, management teams onto websites, right? And that's not really the reason this is going to shake the world. But then when commerce started and you started doing a lot more transactional things on the internet, it said, oh my God, this is where the real, the multi-billion or trillion-dollar opportunity is going to lie. I think for us as well, right now the Gen AI or the AI use cases are a lot in the functional use of the business. But I think, how will you fundamentally reconfigure businesses, where businesses will look unrecognizable from how they looked 3 years back? I think that's the way we'll start to hit, but that comes from a level of familiarity. So I think, everything starts from a state of fluency. I don't think we've hit the level of fluency as yet. See, if you recall, internet is a very simple, to me, it's a very, very easy one to benchmark against, but I think that's the last such tectonic change that the world saw.
If that's happened, yeah.
But even if you remember, at least I know, when we started using the web for the first time, there were some people who got more comfortable with it in the first year. Others still looked at it with wonder, saying, what is this? But in 5 years, everybody had some level of fluency, and that's when the broader unlock started to happen, because it is such a democratic technology that's accessible to everybody. See, any technology that's accessible from age of 8 to age of 80 and is easily understandable is more likely to be a potent force that will create large scale change. And that's the opportunity with Gen AI, at least, right? So I think for us, at least what we are seeing is that, I think, yes, you have situations where people are doing POCs for very obvious things. Okay, that makes sense. But how do I scale it in production? That's the next big thing. And the value unlock will start when enterprise, which is why we look at ourselves saying always that we put pressure on ourselves saying, is this scaled in production? Because I think there are successful POCs all over the world. I don't think people have had too many disappointing POCs. But the issue is, when you take a POC and then try to scale it with a data set in production, is when the cows come home, right? To realize what's really going on. So I think for us, that's the part we're seeing more and more clients doing now, and we do that with them. And as you go through that, the other thing you hit, which is to my previous thing on change management. See, what it takes to do a very localized POC versus scaled in production, which needs also organizational change, also then surfaces what else is required. Like with a lot of clients, while you love the little shiny object around what the Gen AI thing does, which is great, you realize that the data plumbing at an enterprise level is a massive impediment. And that's a heavy lift to fix, right? So you have to then invest in that. Yes, you can do it faster and better with all the Gen AI tooling, but there's still work has to be done. And that's not the as glamorous part of the work. Absolutely. But without that, you don't get anything meaningful on the other side. So I think, those are the things we also realize. Sometimes clients, when we start a journey, we're like, you want to do this, but to do this, there's a foundational work which, will be required to be done. And that's when the aha moment happens. Okay, so it's a bit more than what we thought. And then you go back and you make those changes and you start to this thing. But I believe that the opportunity that is present, is possible. I think we just scratched the surface, because if you just think about it, in the last maybe 2 months, you've seen more change than you saw in the last 6 months. And my belief is in the next 2 months, you'll see more change than you saw in the last 2 years, because the pace of change is only increasing as, what I talked about earlier, the fluency factor is getting wider and deeper. So as more and more people become more fluent with it, because I think it unlocks different perspectives. Because see, everybody can leverage the power of this. So when people with different perspectives start leveraging the power of the possible, together you create something a lot more. So for example, if you say, okay, I think it's most obvious that an engineer will realize the value of GenAI. Okay, that's fairly obvious, makes a lot of sense. A product manager who realizes the value of GenAI starts thinking about, I can think about my features and specs for a future-facing valuable product in a very different manner. So now they're unlocking a completely different aspect. A strategist who thinks about this, thinks about that. So when you now just put these just three perspectives together, you're suddenly creating, conceptualizing, and creating something which looked like nothing before. Because now you have three people who have unlocked fluency, using fluency of this. So I think we are getting to that stage now. And therefore, at least I think this will only continue to, I think, accelerate more.
Okay, that's a very nice answer to it, Sanjay. So just coming to the end of this conversation, I want to end it on a futuristic note. Again, you being in this field for quite a long time and have seen so many changes happening. So let's look at it from, say, 5 to 10 years from now. Sanjay, what do you think is our global enterprises will rely on India for, which they're not relying on right now? What do you think that factor would be?
Yeah, and Vandana, 5 to 10 years, almost the frightening thing, right? I remember when I started my career, 5 to 10 felt like a very easy leap to make. You felt, I have a good picture of what the world looks like 5 to 10 years. I mean, talking about a 5 to 10 year leap now has just become very difficult. But I think if I look at a future facing standpoint, see, I think India has a unique opportunity of continuing to go up the value spectrum, right? And I think we have some inherent advantages. We already have, I think, among the most digitally fluent population in the world, right? If we capitalize on that, you infect it with the startup ecosystem that's now going on, right?
Yeah.
And you look at everything that the government is doing around creating an infrastructure and support system to really make this world class and, in a way, create that enabler. I think, to me, it is very, very possible in a very short span of time for us to look at saying, how does the world think about innovating from India at scale? So if you think about most countries that have really cracked this, what they've done really well is not only just rely on what they have, but make what they have so attractive that others come there to leverage that and then create something from there. So to me, we think about right now India as something that Indians do. I think India is going to be a destination where it'll be Indians plus the rest of the world doing from India. And I think that's the opportunity we have to just be that center of gravity that shifts the rest of the world in. We have all the ingredients and we have this the starting platform for it. And as you said, 5 to 10 years. Now the question is, it's a bit like for cricket is maybe a bad analogy these days, not for the last 1 week, but it's like if you're chasing a very, very gettable score, it still runs you have to put on the board. You have a high probability of winning, but you still have to put those runs on the board. So I think, to me, India is chasing a very gettable score when it comes to being a world leader, of really being the crucible from which you can create innovation for the world. With the rest of the world also participating very actively in it. But you still got to put those runs on the board and make it happen.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for the time. This has truly been very insightful.
Thank you, Vandana. I've enjoyed the chat. Thank you so much for the opportunity.